Mr. Chairman, it is 7 o'clock.
All right. Is ready. We will go ahead and start the meeting for April 17th. Call the meeting to order. For second roll of business is roll call.
Commissioner Wolf. Here. Commissioner Fink. Here. Commissioner Barrett.
Here.
Commissioner Volkman.
Here.
And Commissioner Griffiths.
Here. All right, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes from March 20th, 25. Are there any modifications that need to be made to the minutes from anybody on staff?
I move to approve the minutes from March 20th, 2025.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of March 20th of 2025. All in favor, please raise your right hand. All opposed, same sign. Motion passed. Got the sign, and we will move on to now new business, which is the continuation of the commissioner consultation. Jim Kaup continues his discussion on the planning commission and its roles as outlined in state statutes.
Mr. Chairman, appreciate you all getting up another evening. I'm here to tell you the remainder of everything that I know. Right? So it may be a short night, and I'll remind you, and Barb, if you remember, that my hearing has not gotten any better in the last month. So if you say something in normal tones, I'll just look at you, okay? One of the commissioners isn't here tonight, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name, but right at the end of the last session we had, he asked me a very simple, important question. So we were talking about decision-making, your decision-making with your CDPs and rezonings. And my emphasis to the substantive due process of law requirement that your decision be reasonable. And he said, what's reasonable? And I wasn't satisfied with my answer, and I doubt that you all remember what my answer was, so I wasn't satisfied with it, so let me take 1 minute. And tell you that reasonableness, the court decisions that have dealt with it, it's easier to define what is unreasonable, okay, and leave the balance as reasonable, okay? Courts have said consistently in Kansas and everywhere that a decision that's fraudulent is not reasonable. A decision that's arbitrary or capricious is not reasonable, okay? It's said that a decision that's not supported by evidence, sometimes they say substantial evidence, is not reasonable. So you've got to have those components in there, okay? Well, the balance, and from the material in the handout, you'll read that the courts err in your favor, okay? If it can be shown that your decision was not fraudulent, arbitrary, capricious, and it was supported by evidence, then there's a strong presumption that the decision you made is lawful, valid, okay? Not a guarantee, but the burden falls upon me to challenge that decision as being unreasonable. And if I can't hit any of those points, if I can't say, well, I know somebody got paid money to vote a certain way, fraud, okay? Or that somebody was just reaching out here and making up some argument that had no support in the record, that it was arbitrary and capricious, if I make those arguments, then I've got a pretty good foot in the door to challenge the reasonableness of the decision, okay? And everything that's talked about you guys, it holds true, or even more so for the Board of County Commissioners, because they get the honor of the final decision, right? But sometimes planning commissions can get dragged into the mix, right? And we're going to come to this in a minute, but I'll touch on it right now. I don't think I asked last week or last month, Tim, when a CUP that you guys vote to approve, vote to grant, when it goes up to the upstairs, does the board just make its decision based upon the record of the planning commission, or do they do a do-over?
Well, what they do is they will,
Pick up, Tim.
I give them the option. When I go up there, I give them the very same findings that the commission has been reviewing, and then they will base their decision supported, either they will uphold their decision based on those findings, or they will interpret it another way, you know.
Do they take new evidence when they do that?
Typically, no.
But sometimes they do.
Sometimes what they'll do is, and it's very narrow scope, I always tell people, it's been kind of told to me from other attorneys that it's best to limit whatever information they get to, like, let's say information from maybe some technical clarifications, you know, that might not have been,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
it's that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's fine. It's, the problem is, and that doesn't sound like what's happening here, at least on a regular basis, is that there'll be some boards of county commissioners that just have a total do-over. You know, they'll take you guys' findings and your decision, they'll say, fine, we'll take that into account, but we want to hear from the applicant again, and we want to hear from these 15 people out in the audience that are either in favor or opposed, or both, to my application, okay? That used to be a pretty common practice in Kansas, but it's becoming less and less so because courts, well, it's messy. It's messy, and it can get out of control pretty quickly. And one of the worst things about it, and I had seen this happen in Topeka years ago, not now, but years ago, where an applicant will come in and do a bait and switch job, come before the planning commission, and a whole room full of people hostile to what I want to do. And I'll downplay it, I'll soft pedal it, I won't tell you the real story of what I propose to do. I'll just tell you enough to get my rezoning approved. Then I go up to the governing body, the city council, board of county commissioners, whoever it is, and then I lay out everything, okay? And the planning commission, you know, they thought they were signing off on one deal, and so the public did, and they're okay with it. Okay, they don't show up for the real hearing before the board, and then it's a surprise people, and then what that does is that reinforces this distrust that too many people have of the government, is saying, you know, it's a sleight of hands, right? So anyway, I won't beat that to death. You can take a look at I think it's on the bottom of page 20. I'm out of sequence here, but just some language talking about what can be, the kind of language you can have in your regs that do kind of what Tim's saying is your practice. So that is, you know, you do the review. The Board of County Commissioners does its review of my CUP application based upon the record that you guys create. They got staff there, and they can ask the staff for any interpretations or clarifications and stuff, and that's fine. But they don't ask me as the applicant to come forward unless I've got new information that I think is relevant to the decision. You guys said deny, and I'm in front of the Board of County Commissioners asking for them to approve. And I said, I've got new information that it wasn't, and the Board of County Commissioners can go then, okay, why wasn't this presented to the Planning Commission? And I said, well, I didn't have the information, my dog ate it, you know, something, some story of some sort. And what the board does, they say, okay, we'll send it back to the Planning Commission to take that matter up, okay? And keep it in you guys' court, you know, rather than undoing something you do based upon new evidence that should have been presented to the Planning Commission.
It should also be pointed out, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been told that in the event that the county commission does send it back to the planning commission, it doesn't have to be, they don't have to hear additional comment from the public at that point.
Tim's reading over my shoulders here.
Okay.
That question comes up, and you know, in Topeka, we recently dealt with that. And I believe that the rule is, that it's up to you guys, unless the Board of County Commissioners has specifically said, we are directing you to hold a new public hearing on this issue, whatever that issue is. Or they could conceivably say, we want you to start over completely, take a hearing, take in new evidence from the public and the applicant on any aspect of Kaup's application for a conditional use permit. But hopefully they would, you know, if they did that, they would say, we don't think you did a proper consideration of drainage, or we don't think you looked at traffic issues associated with this, and so we want you to go back and consider that. And if that's all they say, then it's your call. And your commissioners is whether or not you want to hold another public hearing, take additional information, and you notice it up, so everybody knows what the rules of the game are.
So what if, like, we approved something or denied, whether one, went to the county commissioners and it came back because of a new piece of material from the applicant and like Tim said, we don't have to have public comment off of that, but are we able to be like, we can open it even if
It's your discretion. What I'm
should we
saying-
like limit it then?
Yeah, what I'm saying is if the board of county commissioners says you shall. have a public
Yes,
hearing,
we'd have to do it, right, and I get that, but if they don't say anything, I'm just wondering, like, if we had this big thing that went out and then came back, and then we got to redo it, but that thing that made it come back to us was a big deal, I would feel like we would need to open it to the public because they should
Like I
have
said, it's your
their
discretion.
ability
It's
to
your guys' call.
talk, but then, should we limit the amount of people or the amount of time that they should be able to talk?
Limiting the number of people is always problematic.
Yes.
You take the amount of time you have and you divide it up.
Right, okay. So we kind of have control over how the public wants to open up to the public. We have that ability to not limit maybe people, but the amount of time they have to speak.
You
On
could
the matter.
You could limit the content, couldn't you? You could limit it to the
specific
input in the
reason.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have, because I don't want somebody to come down here and be completely going off track.
Right.
From what we were, if it were to if we were ever to have that issue, or not issue, but that,
Yeah, again, it's easier said than done.
Applicant to come back, right.
Somebody sitting there
yeah,
on a rant, you know.
yeah. I know,
that's never happened.
yeah,
And, right.
okay,
Anyway, on the reasonableness, go back to reasonableness a second. Again, fraudulent, arbitrary, capricious, and supported by evidence. If you're looking for a definition of what's arbitrary, I think arbitrary and capricious are really two words the same. On page 9 and on page 22 are some quotes from a couple Kansas cases. I think one on, actually it's on page 8 of 9. If you see an excerpt from a case called Martin, Marietta, the court said that a decision is arbitrary. It's so arbitrary that it can be said to have been taken without regard to the benefit or harm to the community at large, an action so wide of the mark that its reasonableness is outside the realm of fair debate. It's another kind of lengthy way of saying something's nuts, okay? Something's just nuts. It has no, it's not rational. Fraud, you know, I think we all know what we're talking about with respect to fraud. The easiest example of that is, you know, I'm gonna give you something in exchange for your vote. You know, I'm gonna pay you money, I'm gonna offer you a job, I'm gonna give you a piece of the business I'm trying to operate with the CUP, you know, something like that, you know. It doesn't have to be that graphic, it can be, I suppose, more subtle than that, but it's still something that has value to you. I'm giving you something of value to influence your vote, your consideration of my request. And if that comes out, you know, then you are dealing with an allegation of fraudulent conduct and there are consequences. Anyway, I wasn't going to spend a great deal of time about that. On that, I just want to kind of a refresher because I wasn't happy with what I told you over the last time around. When I say something, you know, that there has to be something in the record to support the decision. The record has to support the facts supporting the decision. We talk about the record being my application, right? Tim's report, findings and proposed findings and recommendations to you, and then whatever these folks out here in the audience say, you know, whether that's written material or oral testimony, whatever, you know, that's the record. That's the record of the proceeding in a quasi-judicial rezoning CUP setting. We talk about text amendments, you know, the rules are a little looser, you know, in terms of what constitutes the record or how you're limited to the record. But for the moment, I'm talking about quasi-judicial substantive due process, reasonable decision, and what is in the record that supports the decision that you make. You know, it's that by application, Tim's work, and what you're hearing from the public, okay? Anything about that is even more complexing or confusing than what I did the first time around? Everybody knows what it means to be reasonable, right? It's just a person sitting next to you doesn't have the same view. That's the way to roll. I borrowed a copy of the zoning regs. I looked at some of it online before the first time I was here, but Tim loaned me his paper copy, and I had a couple observations that I didn't make last time around, and you're not hiring me to make a critique of your zoning regs, okay? But so this is free. This part's free. But a couple of things I wanted to pass on to you, whether you want it or not. And it's a small thing on the vested rights write-up. You got it. It shows up a couple times in the zoning regs and once in the sub-regs, and it's okay to have them in both. But the provision is a little bit out of whack with current state law. So I think you want to.
We're in the process actually of updating our zoning regulations with some other, you know, alternative energy stuff as well. So we're gonna.
Okay,
we'll take
a look at it. It really should only appear once in the zoning regs. You know, otherwise you're confusing folks, but a couple of years, you have a 5-year vesting period under the regs. The state changed that to 10 years a few years ago. So you want to deal with that. We're going to talk about vested rights in a moment. We're also going to talk about non-conformances, which you are covered in your zoning regs. But the big thing I want to talk to you about, kind of big picture, and we visited a little bit about it. When I say we visited, I mean, I lectured a little bit about it last month. And that is doing land use regulation via conditional use permits, which is the stock in trade consultant who did the regs last time. And I told you last time he was a good friend of mine. He's not around anymore. But he and I used to go around and around about his approach, relying upon conditional use permits. There are multiple problems in my mind with that over-dependence on conditional use permits. And the most glaring one is I can have a piece of open land right here, okay? And my neighbor doesn't have any idea what that land might turn into, even though we're both zoned the same way. Because I can go down here, ask for a CUP for some kind of an industrial use, something that would normally be classified as industrial, or commercial use, or rock quarry, you know, I like to use the example before of a shooting range, any of those things. Now, am I going to get a shooting gallery right next to his house? You know, probably not. You guys and the Board of County Commissioners probably not going to go for that, but I can ask for it, right? And same thing with him, he can ask for it, and it takes up time and money, and it raises people's expectations on the one hand, it raises people's fears on the other hand. There's no predictability. And I don't mean to sound harsh, this is a nice county, okay? And it's not like you've got, you know, rampant problems that he's driving around, it doesn't look like it. But it has the potential for chaos, okay, to be blunt. It's really hard to have land use planning when you don't know from one piece of ground to the next what might be happening in the short term. And that's not to say you have absolute predictability when you have zoning. You know, residential zoning, you've got commercial here, you've got industrial here. Zoning changes over time too, but it's a more difficult process, and it brings into play more land use principles than the conditional use permit approach.
I have an administrative question for you. We had mentioned, I think you had mentioned last month that conditional use permit is like a rezoning. So
Yeah,
it's
it is
like,
treated like a rezoning, right?
wouldn't that be considered spot zoning? And that would be actually considered illegal if that's the case. And so would it be better just to have commercial and industrial zones?
I have dealt with other counties that have this heritage of conditional use permit, and it probably has its merits. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't forced upon you. There was some discussion about why it could be good, but I think the trade-off is just, the lack of predictability, the lack of ability to plan for where's it logical for there to be some commercial in the unincorporated area? And where's it logical to have industrial? Right now, you've got what passes for a future land use map in your comprehensive plan are those strips of land that front on some of the major county roads, right? County roads and highways.
Yeah.
Well, and that again, that goes back to the 2007 plan, I think, right?
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to, I come down here and I kind of beat up on people, and I don't mean to, everybody's well-intentioned, but it's not a land use plan. When you look at a map like that and say, well, we could have, you could have commercial development or residential subdivisions anywhere along this strip. No matter where the infrastructure is or what the county roads will support, any of that stuff, or proximity to areas that already have infrastructure, like around cities. And on that point, you've got an internal inconsistency in that you have objectives in the comprehensive plan that emphasize that you want to direct growth towards the urban areas, right? For economies, efficiencies for the taxpayer, So you go out and you favor my subdivision to go in next to the city of Abilene, they've got unincorporated land, but land where the city could extend sewer and water, right? At an affordable rate, rather than me having to have some kind of a freestanding water source or a pocket sewer plant or something, stretched out there somewhere out in the country. I mean, that's a good public policy. That's smart growth, to push development towards areas that already have existing or planned infrastructure. But your future land use map doesn't do that. It just, and I may be overstating things, I understand that. But the map is, if I'm a developer and I want to put in a residential development of 15 lots, and I look at the map and I say, well, you have this area of future development designated here. It's 8 miles from Abilene, along the county road. That's what I want. So I come in and I tell Tim, this is where I want to build my subdivision. Okay? And I point that out to, regardless of what Tim says to you guys, I point it out to you and say, hey, you guys want to have some residential development in the county, some growth, stronger economy. I want to help, and this is where I want to put it. So, anyway, I'm off a little bit of it.
Our, just to give you a briefly, and I'll be quiet after this, but I said
Yeah, correct.
No, it's not to correct you, it's just to kind of let you know that previous to 2007, our zoning map for the county had this area around here as industrial.
Mm-hmm.
This was an industrial zone. This was commercial, highway commercial zone in here. That's all this unincorporated area, and you had a mix of residential in here as well. So you had like a multifamily buffering the single family, and then you had transitioned into commercial along here.
Yeah.
And that it was easier to understand around the cities.
Yeah.
In those days.
Now, Tim, you said that the county's talking about updating the zoning regs.
Yes, we're doing it now. We're still in the process.
Well, I may have wasted the last 5 minutes of your time, because if you have an outside consultant.
No, I'm the guy.
All right, well, okay. I was just going to start saying, if you have an outside consultant, you probably wouldn't find anybody that would go this route that you got right now, continue what you're doing. And so I guess the burden, I just set up Tim here. It's not an easy thing to go from the system you got, but I'll tell you this, my friends. You've been doing this for years. I don't know how many, I would imagine you have dozens and dozens of conditional use permits, right?
Yes.
The longer you put it off, the more difficult it will be to make the transition over to a traditional classification of having some commercial, some industrial, and some residential, and then a lot of ag, okay? Because you've got pockmarked county map. And it'll just become more so over time, to the point where you have to give up. You have to just keep doing what you're doing. Okay? So, I'll tell you the good news, the good news I saw from your regs, and it is good news, the provisions you have for the development agreement, the plan approval guidelines.
Yes.
The plan approval guidelines you have that are specific to conditional use permits, on top of the golden factors that you have.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got another set of, like 12 or 15 golden factors on it. So between those two things, you know, on paper, it looks like you're being pretty thoughtful about what goes from the applicant on up to the Board of County Commissioners. But still, in my opinion, it's flawed. That's my term, okay? It's flawed to be able to have you know, upwards of 60 plus different types of conditional use permits anywhere in the county, any place I can ask for. We restate it. You guys have in your regs right now a listing of conditional use permits. There's 60 some of them, and then it says plus anything else. Okay, so it's 60 plus infinity, and you know it just I said infinity. I lost everything out of my head here. Okay, it's just difficult to do any kind of land use planning. Like I said, when you have that many potential uses on any piece of land anywhere in the unincorporated area of the county. Okay. On top of being an administrative nightmare to track everything. Just two other things real quick. You have homestead ag lot splits in the zoning regs.
Yeah.
I should have taken the time to try to decipher all that, but how often does that come into play and what's the purpose behind it?
That originally started because we had a lot of parcels that were on, where the home site was dead center of a section.
Right.
And it had no access except maybe a little road, a little access driveway up from the road. And it did not meet our zoning regulations for, our subdivision regulations for a split. So what we did is we carved out this exception, which we no longer use. We don't do this anymore because all those are already done. A lot of those houses that were in the middle of the section, that's why I was saying we're updating these, and that's gonna come out because.
So that would drop out in your update?
Yeah, and but we had to include that as sort of a carve out for those exception for those homesteads that were in the middle, and because of financing or things from the bank and stuff that required like 10 acres that go along with it, we had to have some way of making them conform with the regs, and that's what we did.
The other thing I wanted to mention, and I know you're familiar with this, Tim, we talked a little bit about this earlier, sign regulations. You have a very sophisticated, very lengthy set of sign regs in the zoning regs. And that's fine, I mean, they're pretty good. I'm wondering if they're necessary for the unincorporated area of the county. And we'll take one step further, because I've dealt with this before and made this suggestion. I don't consider signs to be a land use issue. If I were writing the regs, I would be tempted, and maybe more complicated than I've presented, but I would be tempted to drop it in the lap of the Board of County Commissioners. To say, if you want to regulate signs, do it by ordinary resolution, keep it out of the zoning code. Just adopt a bunch of regs. Just a thought.
Right. Well, I mean, and you have to have though, I mean, we want to make sure that it's not going to be intruding or coming out like over a right of way or anything like that. And so we want to make sure it's behind a property line.
Yeah.
But we don't regulate, obviously, and this brings up another issue of content, we don't regulate content. It's just a matter of, right, we don't regulate, we just regulate the size in terms of making sure it's, and that's it, and setback.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, I really am not trying to make trouble where
Oh, I
I
know.
really don't want it, but I'm just saying, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the zoning regs.
Okay,
Okay.
it could be a standalone. Okay.
That's kind of my point. The last thing, and I was really surprised, I wasn't aware of this until I saw the paper copy of the regs. You do have that referral to city provision. When I briefly mentioned extraterritorial regulation and the role I played many years ago in having interlocal agreements between the cities and the county, having growth areas around the cities. Well, you guys did keep that, at least the vestiges of that, and probably the single most important part of it, and that is giving notice.
Yes.
It's your regulation, so I'm telling you what you already know. But if my CUP is within the growth area of Solomon.
Yeah.
Then the city, the county notifies the city of Solomon, and Solomon has its own planning commission.
Yes.
And either they or the city council review it, and they have a timetable to get back, it comes back to you, Tim? Is that
Yeah.
right? And the city people in Solomon say, no, don't grant it, maybe they might not have a reason why, but they'll say no. And if the process goes forward on up to the Board of County Commissioners, then the Board of County Commissioners can approve by CUP only by supermajority, 3/4 majority vote, which means unanimous vote, right? And I don't know what you all's thoughts are about that system, but it is one of interlocal cooperation. It doesn't give the city a veto, okay? But it gives it some influence, which is good, and was the idea for the interlocal agreements in the first place, way back, 30 plus years ago. So I was pleased to see that. It looks like it covers CUPs and rezonings. On the subdivision side, if I have a plat, then same thing. Tim gives notice to the city that's involved, and they have the opportunity to say yes or no, or no comment at all. I would ask you this, I don't think it covers text amendments, so does it?
No, it does not.
It might be something to think about, again, not to raise issues that don't need to be raised, but.
Now, for what is it, comprehensive plan update, I inform everybody. I informed all the municipalities.
It's a courtesy.
Yeah, and just let them know, and they could attend the meetings or whatever if they want to offer comment. And typically they just say, oh, that's fine.
If I were calling the shots, I would have Tim notify each of the cities of the proposed text amendment that you want to make, just as a courtesy.
Yeah.
It doesn't trigger that 3/4 vote requirement by the county board, but it's a interlocal cooperation, saying we're talking about changing the rules, and it may affect property that's right up against the city limits, so, here you go. It's good government.
Yeah.
Nobody ever got hung for doing good government, right? Well, that's not true. Okay. I'm now finally back on track here. Was waiting for you, Doug, so I've just been stalling here for the last 30 minutes.
Thank you.
Sure, yeah.
Sorry to be running late.
Page 20 is about a point that I want to come up, and some of this may sound like the stuff we talked a little bit about last time. But it's really an important issue, I think, for you guys. It's this thing of distinguishing between what's in the public interest and what is the neighborhood concern, more localized concern, okay? And everybody that sits where you're sitting, they wrestle with that idea of how do you balance these property rights over here of the applicant, the property rights of the surrounding neighborhood with the larger public interest, okay? And however you define that, if that's the entirety of the county, if it's the entirety of the unincorporated part of the county, or if it's some other area in your mind that comprises the interest. Usually it's very simple matter to identify what the private property rights and interests are of the applicant, right? I've got I've got an undeveloped piece of land that, with its present zoning, is worth $10,000, okay? But if I get a conditional use permit for it, I'm gonna put it on the market for $100,000, okay? Or I'm gonna build it out with that conditional use permit, okay? So that's real money, right? Can't touch it, but it's important increasing the value of my property. So you can identify what my interest is. And you can also identify what somebody, in the adjoining area, has at their interest. I'm pretty sure I mentioned to you last time, a story about in Topeka, about an area that was farmland, and so they proposed to put a duplex in, right? A duplex subdivision in, 12 or 15 units. And the property owner, one scenario is a property owner comes forward and says, you know, hey, I look out my window, my picture window here, and I see wild turkey, deer, and I see crops growing, I see trees. I really like that. Please don't approve this conditional use permit for these duplexes. Well, that's a neighborhood concern, a neighbor's concern, actually. That's not the public interest, okay? One person, okay? And another person's scenario comes in, another person comes in and says, same thing, but my property values are going to fall, and I've got some proof. I've got a realtor here, and I've got a banker here that will tell me that my value of my property is going to drop if you approve this project, okay? Still, neighborhood concern, okay? Then you got 50 people come in, one after another, and they've all commissioned, the appraisers and the bankers, and they come in and say the same thing, that this project is going to harm the property value of everybody around, right? Now, it might be a little closer call, right? Depending upon how you identify the public interest, okay? And what your pay threshold is of having 50 angry people in the room. But it's still, it's not necessarily the community interest. The decision whether or not to approve a conditional use permit or rezoning, like I said, it's not a plebiscite, it's not a voting issue. It's not a show of hands in the room about who wants it or not, okay? You go down that path, you're gonna get in trouble every time, okay? You have to make a distinct decision about what that public interest is. And as I pounded away on the last time, the single best expression of what the public interest is the comprehensive plan. It's the official, adopted by the county board statement of public interest, right? So that is always the touchstone, is the comprehensive plan, assuming you've got a well-drafted and valid and current comprehensive plan. If you're working with it, and you guys got an almost brand new one. If you had one that was 30 years old, I'd say, well, you need a substitute for what the expression of public interest is. But while the comprehensive plan is the single most important statement of what the public interest is, even saying that, nobody can tell you what the public interest is. I mean, you've got to arrive at that decision yourself. And you might be wrong, but I can't sit there and preach to you and say, this is what the public interest is, and here's the basis for my assessment of it, okay? It's you guys' call, it's what you're hired to do. It's why you get paid the money you get paid, okay, is to make that call, okay? I know people are gonna say, I'm not gonna say it. No, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, it's a tough thing, and it's not gonna make people happy, more often than not. But it goes with the territory. But if you guys decide, and, if you decide that, if you arrive at your conclusion of what the public interest is based primarily upon the comprehensive plan, then that's great. I mean, that's where I go. When I told you before, when I get, as a planning commissioner, when I get the staff report from the Topeka Planning Department that has all the golden rule factors, the first one I go to is conformance with the comprehensive plan. Because we do a pretty decent job of having comprehensive plans for the city of Topeka. We do like neighborhood by neighborhood, have area plans, and try not to keep them out of date too much. So it is really important to be able to see what the comprehensive plan says. And again, it's not definitive, okay? Because you could say that, well, there have been changed circumstances since the plan was adopted last year, but since that time, we've done 3 or 4 rezonings or conditional use permits in this area that are different than what the plan says because we've had changed circumstances. Things have happened. A big company moved into the county, or conversely, something bad happened, and now we need to rethink what the land use is for that area, notwithstanding what the company is saying. So you've got to use some common sense alongside the comprehensive plan. But as I said before, if the plan's a good plan and it's still valid, then you either need to go with it, okay, or give it a lot of deference, or be able to explain why you're deviating off the plan. Yeah.
Can you explain, and it's an explanation to me as much as it is to them, when reviewing the aspects of the comprehensive plan, like for, let's say, a conditional use permit, is there like the economic element? I always include an economic element and a land use element in reviewing that. And sometimes the way I word it, it might sound like I'm being a little biased towards one side because I don't want to lead them. I don't want to feel like them to feel like I'm leading them, but I leave enough wiggle room in there to say, if you want to push back on my reasoning, you're welcome to do it, and I said, that's why I leave enough room in my staff reports when I'm talking about the comprehensive plan to like say, okay, well, land use wise, this is what this says, but economic development wise, there's pluses and minuses, and I give those pluses and minuses, and they have to determine based on what I give them, the information I give them on those findings.
And you use the word bias, so I just got to go back to that. Don't say that word, okay?
Oh, I know.
It's not bias, it's deference or emphasis.
Emphasis,
Okay.
emphasis, yeah.
Much better word, right? What you said to brings to mind, I think you have one of the golden rules.
Yeah.
I think specifically talks about, or if it doesn't, it could, because it has in some cities, talks about what whether this proposed development, and you've got to be careful about this because you can overemphasize it, is the impact it has on the taxpayers if the application is approved versus if it's denied.
Right.
Okay. And sometimes when you talk about economic development, sometimes you have a loss leader. Right, you want to see an area developed for industrial purposes, and you've got a proposal for rezoning to put a project in. Anyway, I cut the numbers. It's going to say it's going to create some cost. The cost to the county taxpayers for my project to provide the infrastructure to support it is going to exceed the property taxes off my property. It's going to exceed the sales taxes and other taxes that my employees will pay and all that kind of stuff. So
can they include that? Can I include that in that kind of analysis?
Well, my suggestion would be when you're rewriting the zoning regs is when you get to the golden factors is to propose to these folks that be one of the identified golden factors. And again, you want to be, we're not in the business to make business. Right, but you're not in the business to discourage business either. And the more your comprehensive plan emphasizes economic development, then the more the justification is to have land use policies that support it. Right? You could have a comprehensive plan that could have lay out policy objectives like, a city, say a county. The county will have a policy of extending sewer lines for the first quarter mile towards any project that's within 2 miles of an existing sewer line or sewer main. But I mean, to be that much of a subsidy built into the regulations, you know, and then that gets reflected in the land use decisions that are made, whether or not this is a viable project. But you mentioned one other thing that I wanted to come back to. Well, that is where you do all your careful analysis, you know, and you have everything lined up and everything like that, and your recommendation is reject Kaup's proposal, okay? It said it's just bad for the county, okay? It's a horrible idea. And I could do a song and dance and convince these folks that, no, it's a good idea, okay? So now you've got a staff report, proposed findings and conclusions, and recommendations that say deny, and you guys say, approve. And it goes up to the county board like that. So the county board's looking at a report that doesn't match up with what you guys said. Right, and I've seen this happen too often, okay? And the burden is on you guys, although you can direct Tim to rewrite things, you know, against his will, you know, but that doesn't mean he's changing his mind, but you make alternative findings. You know, when Tim's conclusion is that up is up and you decide, no, up is down, then you write it up. You make proposed findings, you get them into the minutes of the meeting, and you actually articulate them among yourselves so they make it show up in the minutes, and you have alternative findings that support the recommendation you're making. Because one of the worst things that planning commissions do is just play fast and loose. You know, you get a recommendation from staff, whether it's a good or bad recommendation, whatever it is, but the planning commission's position is 180 degrees off and with no explanation whatsoever. Now, typically, or what should happen in those cases is the Board of County Commissioners should look at it and send it right back to you. Say, fix this. Because we don't want to go forward with something that we don't know what the hell's going on between you guys, okay? And we don't want to just suit over it, okay? So fix it, you know, if that's your finding, give us some reasons to support it, okay? I didn't mean to yell at you guys. But I made a list here of seven deadly sins, I guess I'll say, about some rezoning problems that I've seen. Actually, it's a list of about 20, but most of them pertain to cities, okay? Because on your worst day, you're not as bad as some cities I've seen, okay? But that failure to properly identify where you part of the company with staff is something that's very, very important. And these are kind of in no particular order at all. It's kind of random here. Sometimes, I told you before about the problem of going through each one of the golden factors and trying to take some kind of a vote on the golden factors. You remember that? I mean, you've got like 12 or 15 golden factors. And if the chair says, how do you all want to vote on, how do you propose to vote on item number 4? And a couple of you raise your hands, a couple don't. Well, the problem with that, it might help you guys figure out where each other are, but I'm sitting out here, I'm keeping score, right? I'm keeping a scorecard of what's going on. I'm raising my expectations that you're gonna vote one way or the other. And when you don't vote the way my math says you are, then I'm wondering what's going on, what happened here, what did I miss, right? It goes back to that thing that you all understand, but people out here don't understand. And that is that you can give different weights to each one of the golden factors. None of you have to match up. You give item number 4 a 10, you give it a 2, you know, in terms of weight. You give it a 5, you give it a 3, and Barb, you give it a 0, okay? You know, that's okay. That's all right. Nobody's gonna tell you what the weight that you have to give any particular factor. I shared with you that what I give the most important weight to, not in every case, but in most cases, is what does the comprehensive plan say? How does it match up with the comp plan? But I have no way of knowing if that's how other folks on the planning commission do it. But when you have that show of hands, or straw vote, preliminary votes, all of that goes out the window, because people think it's just a matter of keeping score. Um, I mean, this is gonna sound like sheer duplication, but going back to the issue of neighborhood concern versus public interest. I don't see in minutes or findings of the planning commissions, nearly as often as they should, a statement of when you get to the discussion stage. Okay, the public hearing is over, and you guys are talking amongst yourselves about what you're gonna do with my application. It is seldom that I hear or see adequate language talking about, well, what is the public interest here? And what's versus a neighborhood concern, okay? And it can be a hard thing to do when you got all these people angry out here, right? You got people that gave up an evening to come to a meeting to wave flags and yell at you. And then you're gonna tell them, well, on the record, of the minutes, you're gonna say, well, we understand what the people are saying, but their comments, their concerns don't rise to the level of being a matter of public interest. They'll be saying, hey, I'm a member of the public, what are you talking about? But not having anything in the record that shows that you even discussed that or trying to differentiate between private concerns, neighborhood concerns, and the public interest is, I think is a shortcoming. And I'd like to tell you that I convinced my planning commission to do it right every time, but it doesn't happen. Last, I guess, two other ones here. Well, I guess along the lines of show you guys having a show of hands about each golden factor is allowing me to come in, pack in the room. And maybe I didn't even have to pack the room with supporters, but I turned around here and said, everybody that wants the planning commission to approve my CUP, raise your hand, or stand up. You have a chance, you shut me down. You say, no, we don't do that. Sometimes the planning commission will have a rules of order that will actually prohibit it. But, just saying, we don't need to hear that. If people want to address the planning commission, they can do so. We don't need to have that. Last thing, we may have talked about protest petitions last time I was here, about the confusion that is in the law. People think that if you turn me down, if you say you're going to recommend denial of my conditional use permit, everybody goes home. That oppose my conditional use permit, thinking the show's over, right? And they don't understand because nobody's told them, they've never read the statute or the regulations, so they don't understand that there's a protest petition period, 14 days, that starts the day after the public hearing is closed. And that is an opportunity to protest the application, my application, not your vote, okay? And they have that window, 14 days to make that and get it sent, get it certified, sent to the Board of County Commissioners, and it triggers a 3/4 majority. And you guys' case is a unanimous vote requirement by the county board. People just don't get that. And I know I mentioned this last time. Rather than the chair advising people of that and sending a message that you have protested, you put it on an agenda, you print it on the bottom of the agenda, or as an alternative, staff can remind people that is in there, maybe just reference the section of the zoning regs, something like that. But don't do it yourself. No matter how you try to do it, it looks like you're telling people what to do. Anything about rezoning? That 5-minute refresher. Pages 24 and 25. It's the vesting of property rights, vesting of development rights. Example, you guys, the Board of County Commissioners approved my plat that has 3-acre lots, right? I have SR zoning, that's a 3 acre minimum, right? Okay. So I got that in hand. 2 weeks later, you guys meet and decide that you're gonna do a text amendment, and you're gonna increase the minimum lot size from 3 acres to 5 in the SR district, okay? And you send it upstairs to the Board of County Commissioners, and they sign off on it too. I'm sitting there wondering what's gonna happen to me. You know, am I gonna have to go all over again, start all over again and get a plat approved, redraw the lines and change my subdivision plat from a 3 acre to a 5 acre minimum lot size? And the answer to that is it depends. It depends whether I have a vested right to develop. And the good news is state law sets out the rules for what is a vested right to develop. And a vested right to development means, as long as I hold that, that means that I can build out my property under the rules that existed at the point in time that my property rights are vested. Okay? The rule in Kansas for vesting, if it's a residential development, like my example is 10 years. Pretty generous. I've got 10 years of a protected development right. Okay? I don't have to turn a shovel over. Okay? But if I can commit substantial construction sometime before that 10 years is up, then I can proceed with my development under the rules that were in place 10 years previously when I recorded my plat. Okay? It doesn't mean that if those 10 years pass, then I haven't done anything. It doesn't mean that I got to start all over again. But what it does mean is that if there's been any rule changes in between, now I've got to comply with that. Like in my 3 acre to 5 acre example, you know, if I wasn't paying attention, you know, and I wanted to get my property platted and then just walk away from it, or go into a coma, you know, 10 years go by, and that doesn't mean that my property isn't platted. Well, I have all approval except that I'm going to have to go back through the platting process to change that, to do a corrected plat, or depending on the jurisdiction, you might require me to start over completely to phase 1.
Yeah.
Or you might do a corrected plat, and maybe 6 of one, half a dozen the other.
Yeah.
But but I cannot build out on the 3 acres that my original plat called for because I don't have a vested right to do that anymore. Okay?
Is that sort of like, I hear people tell me, oh, I can do that because I'm grandfathered in. Well, that grandfathering goes away. I know that's a separate issue, but.
Yeah, that's the non-conformance, and that's the next topic. So again, you're looking over my shoulder, but too quickly. So yeah.
In your example, you gave that you got that 10 years vested. And then I heard you say that, you know, sometime I'm gonna have to show that substantial construction.
Yeah.
Who determines what substantial construction is?
That's reasonable.
Well,
It's reasonable?
the county council that should decide that. It's a question for the courts. It really is. I mean, it hasn't arisen too many times.
I was gonna say, we hope we don't get to that.
Yeah.
If you really truly want to develop,
Get a bulldozer out there, you know, something more than a spade. Yeah. But again, it depends upon the nature of the project and the size and the expense that's involved, you know. If I've got a $5,000 project and I spend $500 in some site preparation, that's substantial. You know, but if it's a $10 million project and I spend $1,000, you know, that's nothing.
Couldn't you
So
do,
it comes down to facts, the facts of the case. So you don't want to be there. You don't want to get to that point where you have to argue and whether or not it's substantial.
couldn't you determine like what the appraisers do, like when they do their maintenance? And they'll check to see if something's been constructed yet, they'll say, oh, it's so much percentage complete. Can you put in the regulations a percentage that would, you know?
Yeah, I don't know of any county or city that actually builds into their vesting rule, you know, any calculation of what is. I think they're afraid to do that.
Yeah.
Or think it's not wise to do it because the court decision could come down on any day to set what the rules are, and then your regs might be out of whack with what the courts have said, and then the next 6 months, another court says it, you know. And there have been just really a handful of cases. that I'm aware of, and I think they really turn on what the particular facts are, so there's very little value comparing one situation to another. In terms of, that's a good question, it's a good question. I mentioned it's a 10-year vesting period for residential construction. For any other development, you're not running down and getting a plat approved or recorded with Register of Deeds. We've got another development. The rule of vesting in Kansas is upon the issuance of all required permits and substantial amounts of construction have been completed. Again, sometime within a 10-year period. So if you haven't pulled all your permits, that might mean permits from, you might have to have permits from the county, you might have permits from the city, depending upon the location, of the project, and you might have to get some federal permits. But you got 10 years to do it. So. Okay. So that's just investing in development rights. It's primarily a problem for Tim to deal with in terms of the public, but it's important to have the conversion in what vesting means. I will remind you that your right to develop land under a set of rules that exist at a particular point in time can be a function of vesting. But the zoning that you have, you don't have a vested right in zoning. And the reason for that is because you guys, you probably, I don't know if you've ever done it, but you have the power to change my zoning against my will, right? I mean, you call me in here, Tim calls me, oh, hey, you might want to show up for this meeting. And I've got some R1 property and you want to rezone it to ag. I said, well, I don't want you to do that, please don't do that. And you can do it. I mean, you could recommend it, or county commissioners have to be the ones to make the decision. But because of that, because the county can initiate and actually accomplish the rezoning over my objections, that means that I do not hold a vested right in the zoning that I have, right? If that makes you scratch your head a little bit, that's okay, because that's just the way it is, okay? Trust me, okay? No vested right in one's current zoning. And your neighbor doesn't have a vested right in his or her zoning either, Same thing for everybody. Yeah.
If the zoning changes, do we need to notify the landowners that it could impact?
Yeah, I mean, that's all, it's, whether I ask for the rezoning or whether you guys force it on me, it's the same procedure with such a due process. You have to give me notice, you give me an opportunity to appear before you. I have a right to fair and impartial decision makers, all of the procedural process, and your decision has to be reasonable. Just like it was, if I were coming before you and asking for rezoning the other way around.
If I have like somebody that's, let's say if I'm updating my zoning map and there's an area that's let's say a group of lots that's residential and then the ones that are currently ag that are south of it, they're technically meet the definition for a single family residential zoning district. When I update the map, does that require them to be notified, or is that kind of?
Thanks a lot, Tim.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Nowadays, and actually it goes, if you convert over from conditional use permit to more traditional zoning, this is going to be a headache for you, okay? Yeah. The answer is, the courts recognize that if there's a widespread, like jurisdiction-wide rezoning, you're changing the rules and you're changing classifications, affecting potentially hundreds, maybe thousands of lots, that there's no way you can give notice and hearing to every property owner. Okay? It doesn't, initially it might not sound fair, but if you had to give notice to every property owner, or even the majority of property owners in the county, and an opportunity for hearing, you couldn't get business done. You couldn't make a change. You'd be locked into what you got forever, okay? Now, that's opposed to a specific, site-specific rezoning, this piece of land, which is clearly quasi-judicial. You have all those due process protections up and down the line, procedural and substantive due process. But it's when you get out here and do these widespread changes. The problem is, and I don't know if anybody's had to deal with this in Kansas yet, but it's that some gray area, something in between, where maybe you're going to be changing the zoning classification for 100 properties instead of 5,000. How many lots you got in the county?
40,000 or something.
40?
Yeah.
In the unincorporated part?
Yeah.
Okay. That's way too many. You need to get rid of some of them.
Okay.
What's the definition?
Get some of them to another county.
A lot, is it just any legal parcel of
Yeah.
record? Any
Anything
legal
with
lot
a
of
big
record?
parcel ID number. Oh,
Yeah.
So basically any piece of land that somebody owns. Is that what, like basically any piece of land somebody owns? Like, no matter the section size?
Well, you could have a piece of land that's half acre, another piece that's 1,000 acres.
Okay, would that, the 1,000 acre be considered one lot?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
alright,
One parcel.
gotcha. Or, yeah,
And I have to make a correction, that 40,000, we don't have 40, we have closer to 15 or something like that.
Yeah,
It's
probably
not-
15
It's
is
not, yeah, it's in the
15,000.
teens, it's in the teens.
Oh, that's not a problem.
It's not-
Notify everybody. No, but you understand what I'm saying here. I mean, even with high technology and the ability to, send stuff out, you'd never be able to do that. You'd never be able to accomplish it. So the courts recognize that. And even the legislature, which I told you before is not particularly bright, okay, they understand it too. It can't be done. But it's in between where you are changing a number of properties, but not all of them. Or even most of them, where these kind of due process questions can come up, and I wasn't notified. The best example I can think of is where you change the zoning for just a particular zoning district. For example, and I can think of, I'm not gonna name the city, but they had a residential zoning district that we decided for really, really good reasons to split. Instead of having this classification, it was zoning classification A, zoning classification B, okay? There was some difference that we were making, and had a serious conversation with the city attorney at the time, not here, but about whether or not we needed to provide notice to the 200 people that were in this camp and the 200 that were in this camp. And we decided not to go there, just to do newspaper publication, back in the days when there were newspapers, and, try to get some middle ground where you try to inform as many people as possible, including absentee landowners. I think we actually reached out to absentee landowners that we knew of, just so we could show that we were doing everything we could. So I'm not sure if that was an adequate answer or not. It depends. It's another one of those, Kelly, it's another one of those in between. It depends. Just one last thing on vesting, and that is, nobody asked this question, said, why have a rule on vesting in the first place? And the reason why, not that you asked, but the reason why is a rule of vesting is a compromise. You're trying to protect the property rights of the individual who got the permits, got their approval and everything, and they're ready to want to go forward, okay? But you also have the whole public interest again. There's been a rule change, we changed the rules, and there must have been a reason to change the rules, some public health, safety, welfare reasons for the rule change. And you want to have that new rule apply, And so what you do is you strike a balance here and say, we're gonna give you 10 years to make good on the project that you got approved. And if you can't do it in that period of time, if you haven't done substantial construction, then we're gonna make you come back in and follow the rules that have been adopted since, in the intervening 10 years.
I guess when you made that comment about substantial construction, it made me think, what if they did make substantial construction within that 10 years, or maybe right at the cusp of 10 years, and we decided that they had made substantial progress. What if for some reason 5 years later they don't make they make a little bit more progress, but not a lot? Where do we go from there? Are they still within the vested rights of their CUP, or can, maybe not our board, but can somebody within the county go out and be like, you have to follow the new guidelines now? If like 5 years after the 10 years.
That's a good question. Doug, you wanna take that?
No.
Justin, I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know.
that's fine.
I had that question come up.
And it probably doesn't happen that often, I just,
Usually,
it kind of struck my head.
Well, it probably has happened, but the significance of the rule of vesting is, and I say this, I'm thinking of some projects in Topeka that just take forever and ever and ever to get done. But that's the aberration, usually people have money invested in a project, they're gonna work on it diligently.
Just something.
And maybe the fear of God, if they lose that vested right, or if it looks like it's gonna be challenged.
Yeah.
And they maybe have to deal with a new rule that they can't comply with, and the whole project goes under.
Yeah.
Maybe that is enough motivation to not have that kind of a 5-year.
That could be. Okay.
Grandfathering. If you look at, pages 25 through 30, and I promise to pick up a little quicker. Non-conformances. I've had this happen a number of times over the years, where I'm at a hearing and there's a rezoning, and somebody will say, does this mean that I can't continue to do what I'm doing with my property? Like it might be just a real innocent question. I asked for commercial rezoning of my R1 property. Okay? Or asked for a CUP here, for some commercial use in the R1, and you guys give it to me. And I say, oh, by the way, does that mean I have to burn my house down? Can I keep living in my house? And the answer, is at that point in time, once the county board approves the CUP or whatever, I may be a non-conforming use. My residential use of a commercial property is non-conforming. It does not conform to the zoning that I have, but it's legal because I commenced that use at a point in time when it was legal. Okay? When I started living in that house, it was sold for residential purposes. So, okay, and now it's changed. And maybe you guys initiated rezoning, okay? Or maybe I did. Doesn't matter. The zoning's changed. I'm now non-conforming. But that doesn't mean I can't continue with the non-conforming use because I'm a legal non-conforming use. If I was an illegal non-conforming use, it's a whole other matter, okay? And that's a problem for the county counselor and the courts. But as a legal non-conforming use, I'm protected. The law protects me, okay? Same way, if I've got a building that's 50 feet high and it complies with the regulations that you have, okay? Again, it's a little more difficult with the CUP approach here, but you gave me a CUP that has a height limit in it, 50 feet. And then maybe you decided to come in for renewal of the CUP or something, and you say, oh, by the way, we have a change of policy, we're not gonna approve any CUPs over 40 feet. So you had to be 40 feet. I have to take the top 10 feet off my building? No. Because then I have a legal non-conforming structure. Same way with lots. If you make changes to lot size, talk about like the previous example of investing. I have a non-conforming lot size because of a change you guys made in the rules. But my lot when it was carved out, it was legal under the rules at that point in time. And I don't have to talk about substantial construction or anything, it's just I created the lot, okay? The lot's there. So it's a legal non-conforming lot. So the law goes a long ways towards protecting non-conformancies. You have in your Article 22, I would suggest when you take a look at that, article that you compare it to what some other counties have in terms of the ways in which the county can deal with nonconformances, in terms of enlarging, expanding nonconforming uses, changes in nonconforming uses, things of that nature. Because there are legal ways for the local government to expedite the elimination of a nonconforming use. And let me explain that. By definition, a nonconforming use is something you really don't want to have over the long haul, right? It doesn't match up. You know, you want to protect private property rights, okay, but not to the end of time. You're hoping that it gradually will be eliminated. And you can eliminate it quickly if you pay compensation, okay? You just buy it out. You buy out my 50-foot tall building and knock it down yourselves, that's fine. You know, there's no legal issue there, just compensation. You can also amortize it, okay? It's a little tricky sometimes, but you could say, okay, you could be non-conforming for X number of years, but at the end of this period of time, you need to be in compliance. You can also have provisions that say that you can't change from one non-conforming use to another. You can't enlarge it. Some cities, not counties, but some cities will have really pretty severe restrictions on the way in which the extent to which you can maintain, keep up property, because they don't want to see investment that keeps it alive, you know. That can be tricky too, because you tell somebody you can't replace a broken window, you know, you can't fix a broken door. You don't want that. But in terms of modernizing, you know, making a lot of capital investment in a non-conforming use or structure, that there is some latitude there to place some restrictions and help expedite the removal of them. You have a provision for abandonment. I think you got a 6-month provision, which is pretty common.
Yeah.
That means if I've got a non-conforming use and I stop it for 6 months, I've lost it. Okay. If it's written properly, I think yours is fine. You want to continue that.
We do that with our conditional use permits as well. If the conditional use permit has been inactive for a period of a year,
Yeah.
then they have to come back and reapply.
And the burden is on you, or how do you put the burden on proving that it's been? Do they have to prove that it's been active, or do you have to prove it's inactive? Doug?
Well, that's a good question. I usually go by word of mouth. People will say, "Oh, wow, that's not." I'm just kidding. I go by and I check. I would check it.
Yeah.
Like if somebody says, "I think this has not been active for a while. Can you check it out?" And then I'll go by there and see if there's any activity. I'll take it.
On commercial properties, it would be things like business directories, phones, back in the days when there were phone books, you know, that's how they check to say whether there's really a business going on. But it can be done, and the one other thing that you have that's set out in state law is if, God forbid, you have a tornado, never heard of, have a tornado come through, or one of these prairie fires gets out of control, whatever, or just whatever. If there's damage that exceeds 50% of fair market value of the structure, then by state law, any rebuild has to be in compliance with the current land use regulations. So even though I have a house in a commercial zoned area, it's a legal non-conforming use, tornado comes through, damages at 50% or more fair market value, I want to rebuild. The rule in Kansas is I need to build a commercial for what's permitted under the commercial regs, or I seek a rezoning to residential. Or maybe not just seek, but get a rezoning back to residential, so I'm back to square one. Any questions about vested or non-conforming uses? Yes.
Okay, your property that you described, that you had, and it is a non-conforming use, and you sell that property to me.
It runs with the land.
Say again?
It runs with the land.
Okay.
But again, you're subject to the same restrictions if you if you, try to put this in terms of the conditional use permit process you guys follow. If I have a conditional use permit for a welding shop, and you buy the land from me and you change from a welding shop to a dairy, okay? You know, you've lost the, you get a conditional use permit for a dairy.
Yeah.
Do you need that for a dairy, a commercial dairy, conditional use permit?
Commercial dairy, no, I don't.
But if it's, let's say it's commercial property, no?
Commercial property, yeah.
You don't have correct, that's never mind. Anyway, you go get your own commercial use permit, you can't have both.
Right.
You know, so you've lost this one. I don't think that's happened in the history of Western civilization, but you never know. Starting on page 29, subdivision regulations. Subdivision regulations, it's important stuff, but it's not nearly as glamorous as zoning, okay, not nearly as exciting. The good news is that Tim does 99% of the subdivision regulation work, okay? You guys don't see much of anything until you see a preliminary or final plat, right? And you don't see maybe a couple times a year?
Yeah.
How often do you see plats?
Last year, we saw 2 of them,
So far this year?
last year. But nothing this year, but last year we saw 2.
Okay, okay. Well, then I would not stay up past midnight reading this stuff. Yeah, okay. Rely on Tim. But, I mean, the subdivision regulations are important. There's a reason why you've got, I don't know how many, 7,500 pages of subdivision regs. You know, it's important for the orderly development of land. It's important for consumer protection. Folks that buy and sell real estate. But a lot of it is what Doug's people, the members of the bar, refer to as a ministerial task. You know, it's not quasi-judicial. It's ministerial. It's dotting the i's and crossing the t's. You don't have much discretion when you consider a plat, unless your subdivision regs are built in. And some will build in things like off-site improvements that I might have to do. I've done a subdivision of duplexes. And under your regs, you have the ability to, I don't think you do, but some regs would say that I might have to make some improvements to a nearby intersection because of the additional traffic load I'm going to put on the county road. So it's an off-site improvement, I'm going to have to do that. But otherwise, we're talking about the public improvements that go with my project, the streets, sidewalks, curb and gutters, whatever, you know, the utility hookups, all that, or utility lines.
We do give them the option to require a traffic study. If there's enough concern about traffic, we would have the applicant provide.
Is that your call, or they have to do it?
They have, it's their call technically, but it's their option if they feel that the traffic should be the issue.
And the traffic study can come
Yeah.
up to a recommendation for off-site improvement.
Yeah.
You tell me I've got to put a signal I'm going to do another point of access or egress to my property. If I say, well, I can't afford to do it, you say, well, you know.
Before he retired, our county engineer, he and I sat down and tried to determine that threshold of when a traffic study would be needed, and we figured you've got 2 parking spaces for every lot, residential lot that's being proposed, and we figured if it goes to 10 or more, then they would need to have, so that would be beyond 5 lots, they would have to have a traffic study.
And that's part of the picture. The other rest of it is how you're going to calculate how much I'm going to pay towards that improvement.
Yeah.
You know, the cost that, not the cost of the study, but the cost of the improved infrastructure.
Right.
If the study supports that. Are you going to put it all on me, or?
It would be probably put all on the, everything's put on the developer in the county, yeah, so.
The Board of County Commissioners, when you guys approve of my plat, or take whatever recommend approval or denial, it goes upstairs. What does the Board of County Commissioners, I think if I read correctly, they actually approve the plat.
Yes, the final plat, yeah.
Yeah. Some counties, and I don't know, maybe just a talking point, something to consider. So, it seems like a lot of counties that I've dealt with, and really a lot of cities, the action by the governing body, the Board of County Commissioners, is just to accept or reject the dedications of land.
Right.
You know, and these guys actually approved the plat, subject to that.
The easements and the
Public
conditions, the public improvements, yeah.
Yeah, but your guys, your county board is actually approving the entire plat.
Right, basically they're, yeah, as to form.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, nothing wrong with it, it's just people do it different ways. Again, I looked at the sub-regs, the paper copies, and just a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. You have a whole article on lot splits and boundary splits in the subdivision reg. And the ag lot split, is that the same thing as we talked about before, that you're not doing those anymore?
We still do ag lot splits, but we don't do the homestead splits anymore.
Okay, well, how does the ag lot split work?
Ag lot split is it's been amended, and so what you got was the amended version. So what we do is we say that in Dickinson County, you cannot split a parcel more than once. And if you split it more than once, then it has to either be replatted or rezoned. And so I always thought that was kind of worded strange because it was too vague for me. So I wanted to put like, okay, so now the way it's written is if you have a parcel that was in existence from January 1st of 2017, which is when I started, around 2017, to the present, then you would have to, if you had a split done in my tenure, and you try to split that lot again, then you would have to go back to these guys and get approved. But anything prior to 2017, you're entitled to essentially two splits. You're entitled to one administrative split and approval from the planning commission for a separate split if it's gonna have a house on it.
But the first one is entirely from you.
Yeah.
Does this come up a lot?
Yeah, quite a bit. Well, not with these guys lately. They've only seen one or two since we've made the change. But it's becoming more common now. People are wanting to have like extra houses for their parents, and kids coming back or whatever. And so it's gonna become more common, I think.
Have you turned one down?
No.
I wonder what the rationale would be to turn one down.
What it is we give the property owner has to give consent to, in the future, being rezoned, that rezoning that these guys would do and just say, okay, and they sign off on it and get it recorded at the registry.
But if I do all of that, there's not a whole lot of discretion at that point, is there?
Right.
It should be approved.
It's always approved, yeah.
Does that split start over if the land sells? For example, if I own 80 acres and want to split off 10 acres to somebody to build a house on, that's the one split.
That's one split, yeah.
So if I sell that 70 acres to somebody else, did they come in and say, okay, I sell it to Kyle says, hey, there's another spot over there, I want to split it one time and take another 10 off, that's 70.
Right, that's 70, yeah, that 70 is, that you're talking about would be what I call it in our regulations a parent parcel. It's an original parcel, which was in existence prior to 20.
It was 80 acres prior to 2017.
Right, so if it's 80 acres prior to 2017, you split it once,
and sell the other
And then
70.
sell the other 70, that's fine. But when you take that other 70 acres that's remaining and you wanna split something off of that, then it would, or then you do.
Yeah.
Then that kicks in, the requirement to, cause that's the second split at that point. Cause I've already admitted, you've already been administratively approved for the one split prior to 2016, that was the original split. Now, you're wanting to split off something else, you're entitled to, how did I word that? One administrative split, and then if you wanna split that again, then you would have to go before you guys to get just approval of a split.
And so then if Kyle sells the remaining 60 acres to Justin,
Then you would have to, get approval from you guys.
Because it stays with the land, not with
Yes.
the new owner.
Right.
okay,
That's why I've got a big filing cabinet full of all the lot splits that I've done since 2017. So I know who's done what.
The last comment I had about subdivision rights is just it's similar to the zoning side about your notice that you give to cities.
Yeah.
And I think, again, I would just consider a courtesy a notification of text amendments in the subdivision regs. Because that piece of it, the subregs could be more important, it's just as important to the cities
Right.
as the zoning regs.
Right, and what I do is I usually let my counterpart in the city know, I give her the notice, and I say I have so much time to hear comment or whatever, and, 9 times out of 10, I don't hear anything from them.
Starting on page 30, are there any questions about subdivision rights? Please say no. Starting on page 36, our favorite topic, not getting serious, ethics. As a property owner, I'm entitled, legally entitled, to having a fair and impartial set of decision makers, right? Decision makers to consider, both with respect to you guys and the Board of County Commissioners, decision makers to weigh in and make a final call on my CUP application, my rezoning, whatever it is that I've got going on here. I'm legally entitled to that, and if you screw up, then there could be litigation over it, right? So, fair and impartial, the component parts of it, in broad terms, are bias, prejudgment, conflict of interest. And we'll talk about each one of those. And those are always important, being fair and impartial decision maker it's part and parcel of everything that you guys do. That's the expectation that we have. When you're sitting there quasi judicial, it's especially important, especially high standard that you have to be in terms of bias, prejudgment, conflicts of interest. Impartiality is fundamental to the procedural due process of law. If you think about it, all the other component parts of procedural due process. What's the point of having notice at a public hearing, the opportunity to be heard, and all that if the decision makers are not impartial? It's a waste of time. Those other things don't help out at all if the decision makers are not fair and impartial. And that's on the procedural due process side, but also, just by definition, our whole frame of reasonableness on substantive due process of law, you could not have a reasonable decision if the decision makers are not impartial, right? Again, it's no more complicated than that. Kansas law on conflicts of interest is kind of curious. So all the fits and starts that the state legislature goes through, including this year, on trying to deal with conflicts of interest. And primarily, interestingly, they're more interested in local government ethics than they are in state government ethics. Go figure on that one. But for elected officials, Board of County Commissioners, County Clerk, County Treasurer, so on, they have to make their statements of financial interests, right? You guys have heard of those, filing statements of substantial interest. And some county, a couple counties will require statements from even folks sitting on planning commissions. The Dickinson County does not do that, right?
Right.
You guys, none of you have ever filled out a statement of substantial,
No.
right, okay. And that's fine, that's fine. But you still can have conflicts of interest, right? The good news, once again, the courts tend to run to your protection, as long as you don't abuse it. If you declare, we'll talk about this more in other component parts of ethics, but if you identify, the Kansas scheme, the Kansas scheme with respect to non-elected officials is disclosure. If you tell openly, and hopefully you get it on the record, you get it in the minutes, you say, I have this relationship with the applicant, the applicant is my brother-in-law, the applicant is my sister-in-law, the applicant is my grandmother, the applicant is my next-door neighbor, anything of that nature. It doesn't have to be a family relationship, it's just a close relationship. If you make a declaration on one of those lines and say, and follow that up quickly, truthfully, by saying that relationship is not going to affect my judgment, then I'm going to make my decision on this issue based upon record evidence. You get that, the courts will go with that. Again, I mean, there's always the opportunity for somebody to, cross their fingers and, to be found out about it. But if it's a sincere statement that I'm going to make my decision based upon the record evidence in this matter, notwithstanding the fact that the applicant is my next door neighbor, then the courts will go with that. Will the public go with that? Probably not. Probably not. And again, that's something that goes with the territory. That perception of conflict or bias, that, well, these guys have been friends, they play poker every Friday night, of course he's going to do what the applicant wants to have done. If people have that belief and you distrust government in the first place, there's really nothing you can do, right? Except you can recuse yourself, and there can be circumstances where that's okay. And it can be painful to do it when you know you're not going to be biased, but you think everybody in the room thinks you're going to be biased. And so what you can be doing, speaking frankly, what you can be doing is if you continue on, you could be undercutting the credibility of everybody else on the planning commission, right? Okay. Having said that, on the flip side of the coin is you're abdicating your duties by walking away. So where's the right balance, right? It can be tough. It can be tough. I've stayed in there and made declarations of that I'm not going to be biased by anything, and know that is not going to satisfy the applicant thinks I hate his guts, right? And maybe I do, but I'm not going to let that interfere with my judgment on whether or not there should be approval or not. Okay, but if everybody else in the room thinks that I'm biased, sometimes you walk away from it and remove that issue. So again, a conflict of interest where somebody's a family member or close friend, a long-time associate, maybe somebody's an employee, or they're the employer of the applicant. People go, I know not everybody, you guys don't know everybody in the county, but I imagine between the five of you, an awful lot of people in the county, right? On any given night, any given meeting, somebody will be in here that one or more of you know, right? And it can be tough. It can be tough sometimes. And it can be tough putting, feelings aside as to whether or not, it cuts both ways. You may love me, but I got a lousy idea, and you gotta let our friendship, influence how you vote on it. Yeah. Anyway, going back to sticking with the disclosure, the statutory approach in Kansas is for elected officials to have statements of substantial interest that are out there filed. And so anybody can look it up and say, this person got X number of dollars of compensation from the applicant, they are barred from, and they haven't disclosed it, so there are consequences there. But if you're an appointed official like yourselves, it's the idea of disclosure. You disclose that you have that relationship. What happens if you don't disclose it? Sometimes there can be honest mistakes that you don't think that the relationship is such that it was worthy of disclosure. You know, somebody's a third cousin, who isn't, so you don't disclose that. But the fact that you work for, you're my employee and you didn't disclose that on the record, that doesn't look good when somebody decides to sue the county alleging that there's a failure of due process, Again, if it's at the Board of County Commissioner level, it's more significant than it is with you guys, but it's still significant, on top, it's not just the legal liability, it's the credibility of the planning commission, right? You guys are temporary residents of this office, and other people are gonna take your place at some point. So let's talk for a minute about ex parte communication, because my hunch is at some point or other, each one of you, you don't have to raise your hand, each one of you have been approached by a neighbor, a friend, a stranger on the street, somebody saying, you need to vote against Kaup's conditional use permit proposal for a welding shop. Because he'll cheat you blind, or he'll mistreat the land, he'll do something terrible, he ran over my dog, so. Vote against it. That's an ex parte communication, right? And ex parte just means, it means from one side only, that you heard it, you didn't hear it, so it's information that is not being shared and it's not part of the record, right? It's not an ex, but it's something that can influence your vote, your decision. What do? Well, the easy thing to say is to avoid ex parte communications whenever you can. And sometimes this can work in some situations, at least. If somebody comes up to you and says, I want to talk to you about your meeting tonight. You say, I really don't want to talk about it or hear about it. You need to come to the meeting tonight. I say, well, I can't, but I want to tell you anyway. You say, okay, if you tell me about it, I'm going to have to do one of a couple of things. I'm going to have to disclose what you told me, which you really don't, but that's a good threat to make to these people. I'm going to have to tell people at the meeting that I heard this from you, or I'm going to recuse myself. And if you think I'm going to be your ally and you're going to give me information that's just going to make me recuse myself, you shot yourself in the foot, right? So that should take care of most cases. But there are instances, again, I have seen this, where it's an ambush. If somebody wants to come in and tell you something in order to get you to recuse yourself. I mean, that's what the objective is to tell you something and put you in a spot where you have to either disclose something that is uncomfortable, maybe embarrassing to yourself or others, and or recuse yourself. So I've eliminated one no vote for my application. I mean, that has happened. It does happen. And again, it's along the same lines of the conflict of interest. If you, like I said, you tell people, hey, if you tell me something, I'm going to tell them that, well, Joe Jones told me, that Kaup is a jerk and well, you don't have to give a reason for recusal, okay? You also don't have to go into detail to give an explanation as that you've had ex parte communications. Again, honor is an important part of this. What I'm about to say next. If you get an ex parte communication that you don't want to share with anybody else, the details of it, and you could truthfully say, this is not, I can put this aside, I'm not gonna consider this, then you just, your best thing to do is disclose that you had an ex parte communication. I had an ex parte communication, but, on the record, in the minutes, say, it's not gonna influence me one way or the other on my decision. I'm open-minded, I'm going to make my decision based upon the record evidence. You say that, and you, hopefully you mean it, you're gonna be okay. You'll be okay. Nobody's gonna sit there and say, well, what exactly did he tell you about Kaup? You can't force you to do that. In court, you might have to do it, but not in front of the planning commission, okay? I know it's not easy. Some people come up to you and, they really, are trying to do their best. They don't know what the rules are. They have information they think is important to you, but they don't want to come up to a podium, make a public statement, for maybe a whole host of reasons. But they still want to share it, and you're a public official, why can't they? The Board of County Commissioners have it rougher than you do, because this person that wants to talk is also a voter. Voters can't do anything to you guys. I vote, okay, so yell at you, but they can do things to the county commissioners. That puts them in a little tougher spot to tell somebody just to shut up, or go away, or come to the meeting and speak up,
And just to let you guys know, kind of to reiterate what I told you before,
Now, Tim told you something different than what I just told you.
No. What I was gonna say is, I will never give out your personal information. Okay, your phone numbers or anything like that. But what I've done in the past is I've sent out emails to you all asking if somebody wants like your email address to send you something for a specific case, then I will do that. I'll ask you guys if it's okay to disclose your email address. But I will never give phone numbers or your mailing address or anything. That's up to you. Now, if you choose to do that, I'm just telling you, staff will not do that.
I need a couple more points on ethics.
Thank you.
And one is that if you have questions, and this is serious, and I hope you take me up on this. If you have questions on whether or not you need to disclose something, or how you should deal with an ex parte communication, or whether or not you have a conflict, talk to him. I was here for this, part of his job. It's, that's number one. This here, because I've got this damn stuff, so I gotta get rid of it. I want to show you what your friends of the legislature are doing. This is one bill that came up this year, and it's still sitting in committee at the end of the session. So, but it'll be alive next year. It started off as a bill that was directed at city and county elected and arguably even the planning commission. Well, they did planning commissions and PCAs, and requiring disclosure. I mean, you could, the form that it's in right now shows a whole bunch of amendments that were made to dumb it down so that it applied only to elected officials and in more limited context. But it's fertile ground. And I've been at this for a long time, dealing with the legislature. And once upon a time, there was a lot more respect for local government functions, and local government officials among the state legislators than there is now. It's just a fact, okay? And it's just, there's a level of distrust. And when they have bills like this that gets dropped in on the whim of a single legislator, and then a whole line of people that have all sorts of perceived grievances against local government come in for a public hearing and make unsubstantiated allegations about local government, it's really painful, it gets me angry. It's hard to make me angry, but I get angry with that. You know, it has long-term consequences. It undercuts local government, it discourages folks from holding public office. You know, it's just morally wrong, but it happens. So, you know, I don't want to go beyond that. The next time you're at one of your fundraisers for your friends in the legislature, you know, you might take them up and chat with them, okay? Tell them you're not crooks, okay? Believe it or not, I'm gonna have one more topic. But I'll be real quick about it because it's something you guys have already addressed. An extraterritorial regulation that you guys do, or that you do, but the county has the arrangement with the cities. And I don't know if you want to bother this, but I've got a small pass about more legislation this year, again, showing distrust for local governments. And it's a bill that would prohibit a city from planning, zoning, subdivision regulation anywhere outside the city limits.
Right.
Now, so what, from the county standpoint, so what? And you may even say, well, that's a good deal. The problem with that is it's a state Midland law, it's something that's purely a local government matter. Cities and counties can work these things out. You guys work it out.
Yeah.
You've got a deal, you've got an arrangement. The state legislature doesn't buy that. They think they can do it. They think they can call the shots better than you can. So this bill didn't go anywhere, and there's a similar, identical bill on the Senate side. But what happened, the way that the legislature confuses things sometimes is by saying, well, we'll have an interim study. So there's only going to be an interim study this summer on extraterritorial regulation, and it's going to be, I understand if you think, well, that's a city problem, and the city wouldn't pay you a bigger price for it if something like this passed, but it's an attack on local government.
Yes.
And that's wrong, whether you're a city, a county, a township, rural water district, whatever. I mean, it's just wrong. And the legislature just doesn't get it. They don't understand that. They want to go with the 1 or 2 or 5 people that come in and say, everything's wrong, the state needs to take it over. And it's really, you know, it's not a matter of political ideology, because you think that the people who don't like big government would be consistent in that approach, you know, and that they would favor local government over state government. But anyway.
We get along really well with all the municipalities, as far as from a land use perspective, whenever there's a CUP or something that comes up around the boundaries of the city of Abilene, I always coordinate with them, and they're really receptive.
Well, on the material that's in the handout, at the very end of the handout, I still list the Dickinson County, Abilene, Hope, Manchester, Solomon, Chapman, I visited somebody, interlocal agreements that I did back in the 1990s, okay? As an example, that's just the approach. And the approach that was taken back then was a little more complicated than what you do now. But I'm pleased that what you're doing now, and especially if it's working, if you say it's working. But what was done back then, you had areas of influence around each city, and then you had a joint city-county planning commission, if I recall it correctly, that dealt with that area, that growth area. And it was the county's subdivision regs and zoning regs applied in that extraterritorial area, but you had a city-county body that administered those regulations. So it was a little more favorable, that was a little bit more favorable to the city than what you got right now. But what you're doing right now is good, and it's working, and I commend you for it. So try to keep it going. You guys have been real generous with your time. questions? I can stay for another hour, but no more than that. But, do you have any questions about anything we're talking about? Anything else?
Conflict of interest. Let's say you had a family member, a neighbor, anybody that you know, and they're wanting to do a property or some sort of business, and then you and one of us on the board might not get compensated. Obviously, that's not right. That's the wrong word. That business they put in, if you were a part of a business that would then work on that business to rise that business from the ground up, and then it becomes like its own thing, is that something you need to recuse yourself from? Does that make sense? Did I make any sense?
Well, I think I'm just something you said.
Yeah, I kind of was,
You make a
yeah.
decision, and
Yeah.
at some point in the future,
Yeah, so let's say somebody came in to apply for some sort of a business,
farm implement sales.
farm implement sales, and like, my business that I work for is HVAC. Let's say, I almost know my business is 90% gonna get that job. Is that something that I would probably recuse myself from, because I might not be getting it because I don't own the business, but I still get paid by the business that's making the money from that job?
Well, that's a good
Okay.
example, because I think the answer is that if you believe you can be objective,
Yeah,
if you're not gonna let that influence your decision, you disclose exactly that relationship, get it on the record, and just say it straight up.
Yeah.
Say, this is my deal, and I'm not gonna let that interfere. And again, folks out here, boo,
Yeah.
I don't believe it.
yeah. Yeah,
But you go forward.
okay, all right, good, okay, thank you.
That's what I was getting ready to ask.
Was it?
Kind of that same deal, like you put a bid in, you get the
Yeah.
job,
Yeah,
but then they come in later to go, well, we get all the pricing,
yeah.
and then you go, well, this is what it's gonna cost, and then they go, okay, well, I know why I already gave you a bid, I kinda know what you're gonna do with it.
Yeah,
How do you handle that? So it's kind of,
They face tough situations any given night. You know,
yeah, for sure.
But, you got a job, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just-
Okay.
Just do it as honestly as you can.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Just to let everybody know, I gave you this, a copy of this that we, had a county retreat, just to kind of let everybody know. And I put together some ideas, I didn't use this at that retreat, but it's just some trivia stuff, just to let you know in case anybody asks. It's that Dickinson County has had a planning commission in place since, I was 6 months old. So, so just, letting you know that, it was adopted in, 1970 by resolution on June 5th, 1970. So that's when our planning commission was established. And it just kind of give you some little trivia points there. And I've also, noted some KSA statutes that, I know are in Jim's, handout also, but I kind of summarized each one of those, so that you can, if you ever need to refresh yourself on anything, you can check those state statutes and see what applies.
I'm disappointed we didn't have you talk at the retreat more, Tim.
I know. Oh, well. Hey, there's always the staff development day.
That's true.
I can always,
Well, you will be then.
yes, I will.
Good job, Jim. Good job, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I told you guys, I told Tim, and I told everybody here that I've been doing this for years and years and years, although you may not be able to tell it, okay? It ain't exactly smooth, but, you don't see the notes that I have, okay? But it's, I enjoy doing it. In a small way, it's doing some public service, and I think the job you guys do is important. Whether you make right decisions or not, it's an important part of the way things are done. Appreciate you doing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
County does too.
Well, I guess we'll move on to old business, which we have none. We have any miscellaneous, Tim?
Just to kind of let you guys know, we've got, I'm probably not gonna be here for the May meeting, so we're gonna put this off till June 19th, but I said we're looking at probably interesting, the first one of these that we've ever had, record, which is a billboard sign, is going to be going as a conditional use permit.
Okay.
And it's going to be, they haven't turned anything in yet, but I said it's going to be, it's gonna be, it's not gonna be huge, it's not gonna be one of these things, it's just for an informational sign, from the Heritage Center. And, they're kind of doing a thing just for advertising, you know, some stuff around town. And that's gonna be coming in June. And, go from there. And that's it. That's all I got.
So, yes, if no more miscellaneous, we will move to adjourn the meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Boom. Motion passed.
Thank you.
Say that.
Background here on this one, Senate Bill 66. It says here that, the bill was introduced by the Senate Committee on Federal and State Affairs at the request of Senator Thompson.
Yeah. I think he just added his name like that just to make me look bad.